Hello, this is Dirk again, and this time I would like to create a very simple little exercise with Blender again that's on the subject of UV mapping, but my last little video was just a bit too trivial in that all I did was explain what the relationships were between all these windows and views. I have my default cube visible in the 3D panel, like in the 3D viewport, and I would like to UV map this cube. And so once again, we start by splitting our area into two roughly equally sized panels. And also I have to draw out the panel way on the right, the properties, the properties panel over here, because I would like the full properties panel to be visible, which means that I've just shrunk my right-hand panel a bit more than I wanted to. And I will immediately convert my right-hand panel into a UV image editor panel. So there isn't any image loaded right now. The entire default cube is selected. And this time around, I'm going to go straight into the material properties. The materials here are parameters that can be set. I'm going to switch this preview to a cube to match my actual geometry. And then I'm going to go straight into my textures. And basically, the texture type has not been defined, and I'm going to define it as an image because I have prepared an image using GIMP. So it is now an image, and the image that we want to choose, we open. I navigate my hard drive because it's a Windows 8.1 system. I go into users. I select my username. I look at documents, and within documents, I've got another folder called Thunderbox, which has a My Picture subfolder. And I have one here called Arbit QMap, standing for Arbitrary Cube Map. And way at the bottom of this list of images is the combination image that I've created, which I've denoted with a +6 in its name to indicate that it's really a two-dimensional image that has 6 equal parts to it. It's a 1536 pixel by 256 pixel image, very reasonable to allow a graphics card to load it. It is less than 2048 pixels across, and in the preview the coordinates wrap, so you can't really see what these images are. They're arbitrary images, and this time I'm going to look at the selection box here to find that combo +6 TGA is now available for me to select without having to go through the file navigation again. Because once I've entered this file into my texture properties, Blender automatically associates it in the other views so that I can select this, and I have a series of images. These images are too large to be seen within the view. Let's zoom them down. I just pressed 4 on the numerical keyboard to make them smaller. I can try to zoom them to some other size. 1, 2, 3. 3 doesn't do anything. 4. So at 1 to 2, they're still a bit too large. We'll leave them at 1 to 4. Now, one of the things that I was describing in my previous video is that if I simply UV unwrap this cube that is selected, first of all, to do UV unwrapping, we have to go into edit mode because we're going element by element and not object by object. I can go into UVs, and there's an unwrap dialog here. I'm going to use cube projection. So once again, we have this pattern of what appears to be 3 squares. They are superimposed. A cube normally has 8 vertices in common sense. In reality, because this cube is not smooth shaded but flat shaded, each of the square faces of the cube has 4 vertices of its own for the purpose of model editing. So instead of having 8 vertices in total, it has 24. And to show you precisely what I mean with that, I'm going to change my selection mode. My selection mode was, let's shift the size of these panels again. They're no longer convenient like this. I have various selection modes. Right now I'm in vertex selection mode down here. I'm going to start getting ready to select faces instead of vertices. I hit A to either clear all my selections or select everything. When I want is to clear the selections, I begin on my left hand side. I use a right click to click the left hand face, and in the UV editing panel I basically have a square. So that's what's selected. In fact, what I can do under UVs, I can select live unwrap. It's not necessary right now, but let's say I do. I use the G button in order to tell it that I want my mouse cursor to reposition instead of, let's say, scaling or rotating. I reposition it roughly on the first square, and I hit my left mouse key again to finalize. Now, back in the other panel, I hit A to deselect. I select the next face. So now I've got another square. It's hard to imagine where they came from. I hit G. I position it on the second square of my texture image. I hit left mouse again to finalize. I go back into the 3D view, and this time I have to rotate my 3D view. I use the numerical keypad again. That is not with numerical locks enabled. So I've got my arrow keys enabled, which puts me into orbit mode. A deselects. Right click, I select a face. Now this one was originally in a slightly different position. I hit G. I remember that this is my third face, therefore I will superimpose it on my third square within the texture image. I left click to finalize. I go back, I rotate some more. So that was my third. A to deselect, right click to select a square. G, I believe that this is going to be my fourth image to map to the texture image. I'm not going to make this an exact exercise, but if this was a serious art project, we would want it to be an exact exercise. So I go back to my original view, and this time I want to do the bottom, because after left, center, right, back comes bottom usually. So I deselect, I orbit down underneath the cube. I right click the face that I want to select. I remember that this is the 5th square. I put it on the 5th square of my texture image, more or less. You're going to see later on how inaccurate all of this is. I orbit upwards. I A deselect, right click, select. My 6th square, G. I move it over to the 6th segment within my 6-part texture image. Left click to finalize. And in principle, I am done UV mapping. It wasn't that complicated. A to deselect, orbit to sort of normalize the coordinates again. And in this case, even though I'm still in edit mode, I'm actually going to hit A to select everything. And just as I hit A to select everything in the left-hand panel in the 3D view, everything is also selected in the right-hand panel where my texture image is located. You'll notice that they're all out of alignment a little bit because this is just a very simple little explanation. You notice that they are 4 squares. If you notice the vertices, they do not join up. The vertices in the UV map do not join where vertices would logically have to join on a 3-dimensional cube. And that basically each of these vertices has its own normal vector. so that the faces, when a later rendering engine renders the faces of this particular cube model, it will try to interpolate the normal vectors between the vertices of that one face, and they will all be equal, thereby keeping the faces of the cube sharp. But that's not the responsibility of Blender. That's the responsibility of model design and integrating the output of Blender into into a game engine that I might want to just export this model into in order to provide content. Now let's render this just to get some idea of what we've got. Render image. And sure enough, I've got different images mapped to different parts of different faces of the cube. They do not match. I'm noticing though that my projection is wrong. It's a linear projection when it's not supposed to be a linear projection. I go back into my 3D view. I believe I understand what I did wrong. If I go to textures, there is a mapping function. And under mapping, I did not actually select that I wanted to use my UV coordinates to map the texture. I have coordinates set to generated. I believe in my last video I specifically warned not to make this mistake. Instead of using generated coordinates, I would like to use UV coordinates. Projection flat sounds good. Now if I look at the material, I will see a slightly different preview in the materials. And now we try to render again, render image. Now this time I truly have a different image on each face of the cube. Because it's been rendered to 2D view, I cannot rotate this anymore. It has been rendered from the position where we just saw the diagrammatic camera. Right here is the diagrammatic camera that does not correspond to the current viewing angle, but it is nevertheless the rendering angle. This is the light source up here, which means that this face is facing away from the light source, and I have not provided additional light sources. I could add a light source with, I believe it's Shift A, add. What can I add? These are all meshes that I can add. Well, I don't want to add a mesh. I want to add a light source. Add. Once again, it is a mesh. How do I edit light sources? Add, select mesh view. Let's see. What happens if I simply select the scene up here in the properties panel instead of selecting that scene? Yes, I can select the scene if I want. No, I can't. I have to be in object mode to add a light source, I believe. Object mode. So the object hasn't lost its properties, but now if I said I'll select mesh, I do not simply have the mesh, I can now add a lamp. I had to be in object mode to add a light source, and I will add a point lamp that points at a lamp, the omnidirectional point light source. I've added it, there it is. I am going to use the G button to position it where I would like it to be. My objective is to allow the cube to be lit from two directions, so that everything that this virtual camera sees is now going to be lit from above and to the right, as well as from the side of the camera, from the front, if you will, and to the left. So now we see 3 of the 6 images. By extending this exercise, we could see all the images. But now we have a slightly more practical view of what UV mapping does. And yes, around the edges, the alignment is not perfect, because when I did my UV mapping over here, it was not perfectly aligned. Of course, for fine art, we would want it to be perfect, but this is not fine art. This is just a simple demo to prove that what seemed like a rather useless cube map at first from the unwrapping exercise can be transformed rapidly into a useful UV map. In this case, which corresponds roughly to the logic with which a cube mapping scheme would work. So that would be it for my exercise. Thank you very much for listening.